Well, here we are at our final segment, World War II and the home front. This culminates our time period seven. Again, this is the monster of time periods. The bulk of the test, I mean, the greatest percentage of the test comes from this time period. So it is crucial that you understand how America transforms from the basically 1898 until the end of World War II here in 1944, 1945. So, with that, let us kind of dive into the first question. What did US involvement look like before entering into World War II? Well, America basically served as an arsenal, if you will, and for democracy, that we were here to support whatever means we could to push up against Hitler and his rising efforts to kind of start to dominate the Europe. I mean, if you recall, he wanted the Alsace-Lorraine region to take back. He wanted the Sudetenland. He wanted Poland. He just kept marching through all these areas, and Europeans were hoping this would appease him, especially Churchill, not Churchill, but the the one from Chamberlain, Lord Chamberlain, who was the prime minister at the time. But Hitler kept marching forward, and so then kept drawing more and more people in to where you had the Axis powers, basically kind of representing Germany and Italy and Japan, and at some time Russia, and then you had the Allied powers representing France and Germany. I'm sorry, France and England, and soon to be America during that time. So America is basically a rather large, like Costco, if you will, Walmart, if you will, all in one, and that these countries who are allies could come and buy from us or borrow from us, if you will. And so this Lend Lease Act was what one such way in which we can tell the Germans that we weren't really involved. We're just basically lending them and leasing to them these various military components, knowing them darn well they're not ever going to come back, and more than likely they can't pay for them. But this is our way to kind of navigate that space of how we're not involved. We like to be isolationist again. But on the other hand, we are using this as a way to pull us out of the depression because our factories, again, are churning, three times a day. There's that many, 24 hours a day. They're churning out supplies and food and weapons and ammunitions and ships, um, to help fight against the incursion of basically Germany during this time. So there was another thing that we did. It was called destroyers for bases. That essentially told England that, hey, we will give you all these military um, boats, etc., that you need, if you promise that we can lease these bases throughout the part of the western and some of the hemisphere that you can see there. So as a these gave America a greater foothold that we then still have today in use, to where we pay leases to have access to many of these types of things. And so the destroyers for base is just another mechanism that America can do to stay neutral, but still have a way to contribute, but more importantly, to get us out of that doldrums of the Depression that the three R's, some argue, wouldn't have didn't help much. Others say it helped tremendously. But either way, this World War II is what enabled us to drift out of those depression stages into now a thriving, growing economy. Well, what caused the United States to declare war? Well, hopefully, if you haven't been living under a rock, you've heard of Pearl Harbor. And so the Japanese, for reasons that I can't go into because of the time for this, but it basically involved when America told them to stay out of China. And that made them upset. So, therefore, this is a means in which they went on the offensive and did a surprise attack on a naval base in Pearl Harbor, there, where 3,000 plus men on this one boat alone perished as a result of that. The goal of the Japanese was to eliminate our Pacific fleet, so that way we would have no chance of impeding them, as they wanted to sit there and like hopscotch, if you will, from one island to the next to control that whole Pacific region of their own choosing and of well, how were Japanese Americans treated during the war? Well, we have this thing called the Executive Order 9066 passed by President FDR, again, using his power, using his capacity to um, determine the cause and course of way our country should go. If you remember the Alien Sedition Acts that was shown during World War One, the same type of mindset was happening here. So basically, due to heightened suspicion of espionage, okay, combined with racist rhetoric, the Japanese Americans were basically subjected to incarceration and sent to these internment camps there. And so the executive order enabled those on the West Coast, primarily California, Oregon, and Washington, to force the Japanese to uh, leave their businesses, leave their homes, leave their properties, and force them to migrate to these internment camps. Of which, if you're in California and you go to the river, you should see one there not too far as you go towards the river near past Needles, and then those who go up to Mammoth, you pass by it. It's called Manzanar, and it's near Lone Pine, just south of Bishop. There, for where there are some memorials there to commemorate what Americans had done to them. I like to compare this to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. So just be mindful of the continued expression of America's nativism towards very specific people. So here's a picture of Manzanar as the camp there south of Bishop on your way up to Mammoth, as an actual place where you can stop in and see some of these barracks here and have for real life. Well, then there was this court case called Korematsu versus United States. There was a young man who refused to be part of the draft and avoided the draft board, etc. Was eventually, um, you know, found and thrown into jail. And Korematsu versus the federal government and the U.S. government, where the significant part of this court case basically found in favor of the United States, saying it's okay for our government to suppress rights of Americans during a time of war. So again, another black eye on our Supreme Court for allowing wartime to impede the capacity for people to express their freedom of speech. Last question that we're on. So good job. You made it this far. What led to the end of World War II? Well, in Europe, the D-Day invasion, all right, led to an Allied push into Germany, where American and Soviet forces converged on the city of Berlin. And then at the same time, with the conclusion of what was in Europe, America was now consumed with turning their attention towards Japan along the Pacific. And so, with this island hopping campaign, where we basically are trying to hop from Hawaii to, Midway to Iwo Jima, these islands, so that way we can have a place to refuel and send our planes off into the air to maybe begin bombarding Japan. We need to recognize that these two theater of campaigns, you need to know them and what they're significant about. And so the D-Day invasion is called Operation Overlord, and this is where a vast majority of American troops landed on French soil to begin pushing Germany back and beginning to regain the land that was lost to the French and the British who were there on that same land fighting. And then we have this idea of Iwo Jima. And if you aren't familiar with that, Iwo Jima is probably the second most deadliest behind the Chosin Reservoir. But Iwo Jima is probably the second most um, just eviscerating time of our Marine Corps, the most brutal place to on this rock, so to speak, to try and find a foothold to take. And so extreme amounts of loss of American soldiers were there. And this is just a modern day quip of uh, the role of, I'm going to leave that one for itself as a social commentary on something else. And then we have the Hiroshima legacy here, where America, with the decision of our president to Mr. Truman to determine what do we do to bring an end to this war. If you've seen the movie Oppenheimer, I think you have a really good insight as to what were all of the challenges that learned people had to go through to say, what have we created and what has become of this? And so you can see on the left hand side here that you have like one plane with one atomic bomb on there is equivalent of like those 2,000 B-29s, which probably would have been shot down or lost, and amongst of tons of uh, boats and armadas of American soldiers who were heading their way to go invade Japan. So Truman's choice was: do I drop a bomb and hopefully bring this war to a close, or do we send in our troops? Now, please be mindful that America is the only country in the entire history that has used a weapon of these proportions in order to bring upon a people group at all. And so some argue, why do we have to drop it on centers of population rather than just primarily military targets? There's a lot of skepticism and there's a lot of controversy about this still to this day. But I like this political cartoon on the right hand side, a little boy on the father's lap of like, which terrorist group did that? Because that's what most people today would assume that was about in terms of bombing. So I'm not giving you my opinion on that. Just be mindful that one group of people said Truman's decision saved hundreds of thousands of American soldiers that probably would have perished in trying to bring Japan to its surrender. And then others on the right hand side say there was no ever reason why we ever have to use a bomb to take out innocent people groups there in those cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, that brings time period 7 to a conclusion. Hope that these videos were of help to you. Remember, please know each of these political cartoons or terms or phrases because they do show up often on the major exam. Have a good one. Stay classy.